All right, I'd like to welcome everyone back for our second discourse in the Seminar of Light. Today's discussion, we will be talking about the nature of light, but not just the nature of light. We'll be delving into the underlying motivational forces that drive our actions, create our circumstance, and that motivate our movements within the karmic creative cycle of now. So, before we dive into these forces of movement, the forces that drive our universe, we're going to be using some scientific terminology, along with some different. We're going to be trying to explain this from a few different angles, try and get a holistic perspective here. And so, to begin, I'd like to start by deconstructing our notion of the word and the symbol for science. I think this is a very loaded word, and it has a lot of preconditioned archetypes associated with it. Within the Western cultures, science has, to a large degree, replaced religion, and they use these scientists these days almost like priests to give them their truths, and and this, of course, leads to the fallacy of authority, and it leads to people being manipulated. And so, we're going to take a look at science because the science, or more importantly, the scientific method, is very important and influential in our information revolution. So, what is science? Science, the word comes from the Latin root meaning scientia, which means knowledge. And science is a systematic, this is coming right from Wikipedia, it is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the universe. Now, the key word in there is testable. The idea behind science is to create a set of conditions, an environment in which you get a measured result. And the idea is that you can replicate these environments and test the result for yourself. It's not to say, oh, this is it and that's the way it is. Science is all about always questioning what is. It's about always looking for the truth, which is present in the now, in your experience. Now, science is limited in the sense that it is based on measurements. And measurements are parameters. We spoke about this in the first discussion. Whenever you create a parameter, you're creating a finite sense. Whenever you create a measurement, you're creating a biased interpretation. Like a meter or a foot is just a pre-agreed upon measurement that we all said, all right, we're all going to agree that a foot means this distance, and then we find ways of measuring it, and then we convert those measurements into mathematics, which allows us to be much more influential in our creations and to break things down so that we can go deeper into the smaller parts of the microcosm and create a more defined picture, both of how we engineer, create, and understand our universe and reality. One of the important things there was measurement. And so science is all about measurement. That's how we get that's how we translate it into mathematics. And through these measurements, we need to understand that there's always a probability of error, of bias error. You see, any measurement can be infinite. These measurements are numbers, and within those numbers are decimals, and decimals go on forever. And so any measurement is always relative to exactly what degree you want it to be accurate. So some people say that physics is an exact science, but this is only because they calculate every biased error, they calculate every measurement error, every error within the differences of results, and they create probabilities of how accurate any measurement is. And so they'll say this is accurate within 99.9876, and they'll create a big number, so it's accurate within a very, very high probability. And so science is never an absolute truth. It's an ever-changing phenomenon. It's an ever-changing and ever-evolving search for truth. And I think Albert Einstein phrased it best when he said, there's no number of experiments that will ever prove me right, but only one experiment can prove me wrong. Science proves that if you create a condition, this is what has always happened in the past. Doesn't mean it's going to be what happens in the future, but we know that with probability, every single time we did it within these conditions, this happened. If you don't believe me, you can test it for yourself and find out within your experience, because that's where the truth is. It's in your experience. And this was a very big revolutionary phenomenon, because in the past we have had a lot of very corrupt alchemists that have been creating intention for their own selfish aims. And so what do I mean by this? And what is alchemy? A lot of people think alchemy is kind of like chemistry, the transmutation of base metals into higher perfections of elemental existence, like turning lead into gold. And that is a very misunderstood notion of it. The art of alchemy is the art of conscious transmutation. It's the art of creating conscious experience. And within the notion that I'm talking about the power dynamics like church and state, and even corporation. Like a modern example, an example of alchemy would be an ad that is trying to get you to want their makeup. They create desires, they create intention, they create fulfillment in you having what they have. They create experience. And so alchemy is about creating experience, creating conditions that by which we evolve through experience. And so science is all about breaking down the deconstruction of our world so that we are no longer influenced by these exterior alchemical sources that have been lost in their own sin. And the Greek root for sin is originally used for an archer to miss their mark, and it means for somebody to act in misunderstanding, to miss the point of who and what they are as infinite beings of source, and to attach to a finite boundary, an ego attachment, and in that they serve a deluded interest that is very destructive in nature, because whenever we attach to a finite entity, we create dissonance within our being, as we are infinity. And any attachment to a temporal construction will eventually lead to suffering when that construction is changed, because that is the nature of all life, is ever changing, ever evolving. Nothing ever stands still, or else it would not move. It would not be experiential. Time is literally movement. Einstein phrased this best in his theory of relativity, where time and space became one. It became an entity of space-time because it was based upon observation. Now, diving back into the sciences and the nature of forces, so we have this new invention coming out in the 1930s called the quantum mechanics, quantum physics. What is quantum physics? This is a deeper understanding within the forces that drive our universe. So in quantum physics, as we dive deeper and deeper into these forces, we discovered something called the observer bias. Now this is very important, or not the observer bias, but the observer effect. And essentially it means that the act of observing something, just observing an action, can influence the phenomena being observed. And this is a revolutionary new way of seeing things, because science was all about creating conditions and then watching a manufactured result within those conditions. And as we delve deeper and deeper into the mechanisms of creation, we find that the conditions, or the environment in which a experiment takes place, is actually influenced and interrelated with the observers. But if you are the environment and you're bringing a different archetype of experience, a different filter of reality to that experience, then on the quantum level you are going to affect it. And so quantum physicists had to start leaving the rooms when they did observations, when they took measurements, because just their presence alone would change the observed effect. Now, and in quantum physics they call this a superposition, where a quantum particle, like a quark, its fluctuations will actually exist in all possible frequencies that exist in an infinite parameter. And what happens is then when the observer observes that quantum particle, it collapses into the frequency of observation. It literally creates the parameter of experience. let's back up a little bit. So the forces that move our universe, there are four fundamental forces or interactions, as we call them in physics. And the four main ones that drive our universe are the gravitational force, the electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear, and the weak nuclear. And this is taken right out of Wikipedia. It says each understood as the dynamics of a field. This is very important. So force is fluctuations of space-time. It's movement of space-time within a field. So let's take the idea of gravity real quick. Gravity, so anything that has mass has gravity. It is a pulling force. It is a contractioning force. And it affects everything in the cosmos instantaneously. And so right now, we are actually we're having these exterior forces interact with our being. So every galaxy, every piece of matter in the universe is right now interacting with us. And I'd like to bring this back to one of the questions that was asked in the first seminar about when we're born and how we're born with different character types. And I think that this question was primarily in context to kind of astrological characteristics we're born with. And I went into the boundaries of how we have experiences beyond our lives, but I also wanted to add to that when we're born, we have all these subconscious influential dynamics into our being. We have so many different, just like the gravity of all the stars in the cosmos are affecting us and interacting with us, so are the light, the electromagnetic radiation. And so we have all of these other expanded influences when we're born that help develop our character types within this parameter of lifetime as well. But back to the fundamental forces guiding our universe. So the main forces here that we're going to be talking about are gravitation and the electromagnetic spectrum, because these are the two primary ones. And in my opinion, of course, all of this is based on measurement and theory. I don't want you to take anything I say as fact. I want you to go and research what people have come to experience and create your own expanded interpretation. But from what I understand, the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force are similar to gravitation and electromagnetic forces in that they are an expanding and contracting. The strong nuclear is kind of a microcosmic of gravitation. It's a contracting force that holds protons and neutrons together. And of course, this goes much, much deeper. I'm getting a very base example, but I just want to touch on some important concepts as we relate them to metaphysical truths. And the weak nuclear is an expanding force when molecules are out of balance, like say when we enrich plutonium. It means we're adding electrons to it that are outside of its natural balanced state, and the weak nuclear force is expanding electromagnetic radiation as that molecule seeks to find harmony, balance. Now, back to gravitation and electromagnetic radiation. This is where stuff gets really fascinating. So electromagnetic radiation. Many people see light. They might understand it as a photon. They might understand it as a field. They might understand it as frequency. But first of all, anybody that tells you they understand light is full of shit. It's such a complex notion. And one of the problems is that many of the people that study physics and science are very, very unbalanced, linear-minded, because you have to be very good at math within the way that we teach science. And so they don't know how to understand light outside of the quantum nature of it. Now, what do I mean by quantum nature? I mean that they found a way to quantize light, which is essentially to create a parameter for it, to measure it. Any measurement is a parameter, boundary. And so they found a way to measure light. And how they measure light is by measuring its effect on an electron, how much it can move an electron. And now this is fascinating because it gave us, this is what opened up the field of quantum physics. But what we're actually measuring in light, they call it a photon, which is like this fragmented piece of light. They call it an individual piece, but what it really is more like a wave. And so what happens is within this infinite spectrum that's all connected, there are waves, and we can measure these bumps of energy, these waves, and we can fragment them into a quantized photon. And so that's where the invention of quantum physics came from, when we began to be able to measure light. But it is important to remember that light is a field. It is, think of it like a sphere, an ever-expanding sphere. Now, within that sphere, this is an expanding force. Electromagnetic radiation comes out of particles. It literally emits out of particles when the electrons move, when energy is released, and this field is blasted out in all directions, spherical around the object, and ever expanding, and it is fluctuations of space-time expanding out. And so there's two primary forces that govern us, expansion and contraction. So within this dimension of polarity, just as we have this electromagnetic radiation that is expanding out of our being, we also have the force of gravity, which is a force of contraction. And so this is another concept that is very misunderstood, and I'd like to shed a little light on it. When we think of gravity, there's a very common analogy used to explain Einstein's theory of relativity. And essentially, you think of space-time kind of like a trampoline, and a piece of matter like a bowling ball on that trampoline. And so it curves space-time so that anything within that space-time is going to be attracted to the bowling ball. It's going to be pushed down into that contraction of space-time. But it's important to remember that space-time is not two-dimensional. It is three-dimensional. And so what we have here is, let's think of this connected field of gravity, or the Higgs boson field, because this is actually what it is what they detected is the Higgs boson field. Of course, we call it the Higgs boson field because those are the names of the scientists that came up with the theory and that proved it mathematically. And we're very ego-minded, and we like to give things people's names instead of names that actually make sense, like a magnetic field. So we're just going to call it the magnetic field. You can call it the Higgs boson field. You can really call it whatever you want. The idea is to be able to get people to relate to what we're talking about. So there's this interconnected magnetic field, and the way quantum physicist Nassim Haramein explains it, which of course this is all theory, but I think this is the way that I resonate with best, and the way I think it makes the most sense, is that matter, or better yet, these quarks that make up the protons of our matter. It's important to remember that all matter is primarily just empty space. But within these little quarks that make up the protons and neutrons that consist of primarily our matter, you have what are essentially miniature black holes, spheres of fluctuating space-time. But instead of expanding spheres like the electromagnetic radiation, which is fluctuations of space-time expanding out, we have fluctuations of space-time contracting in. So little black holes, or quarks, are kind of like little black holes, these little contracting entities. And when you contract space-time around you, when you squeeze that space-time around you into a little ball, then it is going to pull anything within the space-time around you into that ball. And we discovered this through finding out that gravity affected light. And before Einstein's theory of relativity, we thought that gravity was only affected matter. But it turns out that matter is actually just polarity of light. It is a fluctuation within a contraction of space-time, whereas light is an expansion of space-time. So we have these two primary forces that run our lives. And within any context of understanding, we're going to cross-correlate these to the emotional and conscious experiences of expansion and contraction. So just like with these spheres of electromagnetic radiation coming out of the chemical interactions within our bodies, and here's also a very important thing to remember as well, is that the gravity that we experience is what is responsible for the creation of our matter. So, well, me and you, most people already know this, but we are made out of stardust. The chemical components and the base elements that make us up are created in nuclear fusion, which happens in stars. And so essentially this nuclear fusion, what happens is there's these little miniature black holes, which we call matter particles. And once you get enough of them together, you have such a contracting force. There's such a force of contraction that you create a singularity. And what a singularity is 0 and 1. It is everything and nothing. And within that singularity, you create something new. So two things come together. Within a star, you have so much gravity, so much contraction, that these two hydrogen atoms fuse together to become a helium atom. And when that happens, boom, you have this expanding sphere of electromagnetic radiation, i.e., the light that we perceive as our reality, and that which instigates and catalyzes the chemical reactions that drive our biosphere, that drive our life. And so, the basis and fundamental interactions of life and the chemical processes that drive our reality are fundamentally based on the expansion of light, which is facilitated by the contraction of gravity. Now, just like all things, we're all connected, and there are always multiple angles and dynamics of looking at any one thing. So just as our physical structure of the universe expands and contracts to create new cycles of evolving experience, we also expand and contract on the mental levels as well. And so what I mean by this is there was a Indian philosopher, I can't remember his exact name, it was maybe Tagore or something like that, really popular in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and he phrased love as an expansion of self. He said that love is our ability to relate to others. It is expanding the conscious experience to a new parameter. And so, for an example of this, when you love a significant other, their happiness becomes your happiness. Their sadness becomes your sadness. Your guys' conscious experiences are interrelated and intertwined together. And so love is like an archetype. It is a dimension of experience that we can use to expand our being, an expansion of self. And paradoxically, we also have this emotion of fear. And fear is the contracting force of consciousness. Fear is pulling away from. Fear is the experience of limitation and separation, and you dissonate with what is present, and you contract back in. And if you constrict enough, then eventually you create this closed loop, cyclical nature of consciousness. I study myself when I get angry, and I find that I'm in constant justification of that anger. In order for me to hold on to that toxic, dissonant state, I have to constantly be re-justifying why I'm angry and reliving that within my own conscious being. It's a very cyclical nature where you become very fixated on the injustice that then justifies your anger, which is of course a very destructive state. You're then in a state of absolute destruction, and because your mind is so fixated within this very narrow parameter of focus, you can be easily manipulated. And so that's what the problem is today with all of these corrupted alchemists that are creating intention, is because they can easily incite anger within these archetypes of suffering and then direct that destructive nature towards their own ends with subtle manipulation, because when you're ignorant to the causal factors, it's very easy to reciprocate any suffering against someone that may be indicated as creating yours, when of course the truth is that all suffering comes from within. And so it's important to understand these two factors, because right now we live in a very imbalanced culture where fear is constantly cross-correlated with certain experiences, and we're very disconnected from our creative nature within the context of these consumer societies. And so these contracting forces are not necessarily bad. It is important to keep balance, and the contraction is what allows us to blast forward. If any spiritual practitioner will tell you, if you want to manifest something, first you need to pull back. You need to pull back. You need to bring in your meditation and your visualization, and from that state of contraction, you expand back out into whatever you're trying to manifest within the now. Because the truth is, we don't create out of nothing, we create out of everything, because nothing is ever created or destroyed, it is just ever changing. And that is the law of physics. No energy is created or destroyed, it is ever evolving. And just as it's true on the physical level, it's true on the mental and spiritual as well. So the whole idea behind understanding these subtle stimuli is to give us the ability to consciously contract and create ourselves instead of reactivating or contracting out of a reactive state of fear. Or, in other words, basing our motivations on an exterior influence, which is where the fear is generated out of our ignorance. And so, as we begin to discern these underlying incentives that drive our life, we begin to have more control over the conditioning of new environments that dictate our reality, creating conditions to manifest the experiences that we're looking for, which is expansion and consciousness, and ever evolving and uplifting love and joy and enthusiasm. In Buddhist psychology, one of the big misunderstandings is that people believe that Buddhism is about negating desire. And Buddhism, I think that's a big misunderstanding. Of course, there's a lot of different interpretations in sects, but for the most part, Buddhist psychology does not aim at pushing away or removing desire from your life, but at understanding it. Because in our understanding and an expanded awareness, we then have the ability to really get what we desire, which is, I think Yogi Sri Ramana Maharshi quoted it best. He said, "Happiness is your nature. It is not wrong to desire it. What is wrong is seeking it outside when it is inside." So the idea is, it is not wrong to desire to be happy. It is not wrong to have desire. What is wrong is to create the conditioned archetype that the fulfillment to those desires are exterior to you, when in truth, the condition of your fulfillment will always be within. Happiness is not a result of gratitude, or I said that wrong. Gratitude is not a result of happiness. Happiness is a result of gratitude. We condition these states of being within us, and then as we express through this newfound archetype of experience, we then alchemize the transmutation of self as we go in this ever-evolving cycle of life. And so, yeah, I think another yogi, Nasagarata Maharaj, quoted it best when he said, "Wisdom is knowing I am nothing. Love is knowing I am everything, and between the two my life flows." We are everything and nothing. We are expansion and contraction. And the more we understand these underlying forces, the more we understand the inherent subconscious intentions and desires that run our life, the better suited and more empowered we will be within this moment to manifest a life that we can be proud of, that we love, that brings us fulfillment and happiness and joy. There's the quote, "Man's essence is revealed within his desires." Condition your desires to bring you fulfillment, truth, abundance, love, growth, and you will condition new archetypes of experience. It is about the rotor, it is about the motivating director of our movements, and then bringing light to these underlying incentives. And with that, I think we're going to end this discussion in the Seminar of Light with one final quote by John Lennon, which I think does a beautiful job of reiterating what we've been talking about today. "There are two basic motivating forces, fear and love. When we are afraid, we pull back from life. When we are in love, we open to all that life has to offer with passion, excitement, and acceptance. We need to learn to love ourselves first in all our glory and our imperfections. If we cannot love ourselves, we cannot fully open to our ability to love others or our potential to create. Evolution and all hopes for a better world rest in the fearlessness and open-hearted vision of people who embrace life." John Lennon, man who really knew what was up. So with that said, I want to say I love you all. Namaste. Thank you for coming and listening to what I have to say, and I look forward to hearing from you all in the future.